Molly Tran had three things going against her that Tuesday morning. A broken umbrella, a résumé with a coffee ring on the corner, and an address she had scribbled on the back of a grocery receipt that turned out to be completely wrong. She'd been walking for 20 minutes in a light Vancouver drizzle, the kind that doesn't feel serious enough to stop for but is absolutely committed to ruining your hair. The job posting had said Harlow Property Management, Suite 400. What it had not said was that there were two buildings on Burrard Street with a fourth floor, and that one of them housed a property management company for rental apartments, and the other housed Harlow Developments, one of the most powerful real estate firms in Western Canada. Molly walked into the second one. The lobby was the kind of space that made her feel underdressed just by existing in it, marble floors, a reception desk that looked like it cost more than her rent for 3 years, a woman behind it with the kind of posture you only get from years of being paid to look unimpressed. Name? The receptionist asked without looking up. Molly Tran. I'm here for the interview. The woman typed something, paused, typed again. Interview for the assistant position? Molly hesitated half a second. Close enough. Yes. She was handed a visitor badge and directed to the 22nd floor. The elevator opened onto a hallway that smelled like sandalwood and ambition. A woman in a charcoal blazer appeared almost immediately, clipboard in hand, heels clicking like punctuation. Mrs. Tran? That's me. I'm Dana, executive coordinator. Miss Harlow will see you in a moment. Please wait in the glass room. Mr. Harlow. Molly had heard of him vaguely, the way you hear of weather systems forming far out at sea. Vaughn Harlow, 38, second-generation real estate, the kind of person who appeared on the covers of business magazines looking like he'd never once waited for anything in his life. She sat in the glass room and tried to arrange her face into something that looked like she belonged there. The door opened. He was taller than the magazine photos suggested. Dark jacket, no tie. A watch that probably cost more than a semester of university. He sat down across from her and looked at her resume without saying anything for a moment that lasted slightly too long. Molly Tran. He said it like he was reading a file. You've worked in reception, event coordination, and he paused. A bakery. The bakery was seasonal. He looked up. His eyes were a very particular shade of gray that seemed specifically designed to make people feel they were being evaluated. Why do you want to work here? Molly had a practiced answer for that. She'd rehearsed it on the SkyTrain. But something about the way he was looking at her made the practiced version feel false, and she'd always been bad at false. Honestly, I applied to Harlow Property Management on Burrard. The other one. I think I might be in the wrong building. A pause. But, she continued, because she had never in her life walked away from something without at least trying. I've been running schedules, managing competing priorities, and keeping difficult people calm since I was 17. I'm quick, I don't forget things, and I'm very hard to rattle. So if you have an assistant position open, I'd genuinely like it. And if you don't, I'll shake your hand and find the elevator. Vaughn Harlow looked at her for a long moment, not with irritation, with something closer to curiosity which she suspected was rarer for him. We do have a position open, he said finally. My last assistant left 8 days ago. What happened to them? They cried in the stairwell and submitted their resignation by text. That's specific. I have high standards. So do I, Molly said. I just don't cry in stairwells. He almost smiled. It was very almost. But she caught it. Start tomorrow, he said, standing. 8 o'clock. Dana will send you the paperwork tonight. Molly stood too, slightly stunned. Just like that? You walked into the wrong building and talked your way into a job at one of the top development firms in Vancouver. That's either very lucky or very competent. Either way, it's useful. He picked up her resume. Besides, the bakery experience is reassuring. Anyone who's survived a Christmas rush can handle a board meeting. She laughed before she could stop herself. He didn't, but his shoulders relaxed about 2 degrees. In the elevator going down, Molly held the visitor badge and tried to figure out what had just happened. She'd come in for a job managing rental disputes and somehow left with a position assisting one of the most intimidating men she'd ever met in a building that made her feel like a guest at someone else's life. She texted her best friend, Adrian. I either just made a huge mistake or a huge upgrade. Possibly both. Adrian responded immediately. Those are the same thing. When do you start? Tomorrow. God help you. Molly showed up at 7:54. Dana met her at the elevator with a schedule printed in a font size that suggested urgency, a list of contacts she was expected to memorize by noon, and the information that Mr. Harlow had already sent 3 messages that morning before 8 a.m. "Is that normal?" Molly asked. "On a slow day," Dana said. Her desk was clean, which she appreciated. Her computer was new, which she also appreciated. The mug waiting on her desk said "Details matter," which she took as either a warning or a philosophy. For the first 2 hours, she fielded calls, reorganized a scheduling conflict that had apparently been causing low-level panic for 4 days, and accidentally forwarded an email to the wrong Harlow. There were 2 people with that last name in the system, which nobody had warned her about, and she sent a catering order to Vaughn's uncle, who was semi-retired and confused by it, but ultimately charmed. "You accidentally made a friend," Dana told her. "I'll take it," Molly said. At 11, Vaughn came out of his office with a coffee and a look that said something had gone wrong, and he was choosing not to say it in front of everyone. "The West Side file," he said at her desk. "On your desk as of 9:45. Blue folder, flagged tabs, summary page on top." He blinked. Just slightly. The Henderson callback, rescheduled to 3:15. He preferred the afternoon. "And the contractor quote for the Kitsilano project. Emailed to you at 10:02. I also noticed the numbers didn't account for the revised zoning requirements, so I added a note at the bottom with the relevant clause. You may want to have someone verify it, but I'm fairly sure the original estimate was low." Vaughn stood there for a moment. He was clearly a man who had a response ready for most situations. He did not appear to have one ready for this. "You've been here 3 hours," he said. "I catch up fast." He went back into his office without another word, but he left the door open, which Dana later told her was actually significant. "He never leaves the door open," Dana said. "What does that mean?" "It means he's not annoyed by you," which is, for the record, not guaranteed. By the end of the week, Molly had settled into a rhythm that surprised her. Vaughn was demanding, precise, and genuinely difficult to read, but he was never unfair. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask for things without reason. And every time she got something right, which was increasingly often, there was a small, controlled acknowledgement. Not effusive, just real. On Friday afternoon, as she was finishing up the week's correspondence, he appeared at her desk again. "There's a thing," he said. She looked up. "A thing, a dinner, Saturday." "My mother's idea. She hosts one every few months." He said the word hosts like it was mildly threatening. "She's been asking about my personal life." Molly waited. "She has decided on her own that I need to be set up with someone. She's already mentioned 2 names, and I believe she's added a 3rd. That sounds uncomfortable." "It is. I'd like it to stop." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "I realize this is unusual. You want me to come as your girlfriend." He didn't look embarrassed exactly, but he did look like a man who preferred not to be in the position of asking for things he couldn't control. Temporarily. Just long enough to make her think there's someone already in the picture. And what exactly does this involve? Dinner at her house in West Van, smiling. Not correcting her when she asks questions about us. How long have we allegedly been together? 3 months seems believable. Molly leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Harlow, Vaughn. It felt strange to say. You are aware that this is the kind of plan that sounds reasonable for about 48 hours, and then becomes very complicated." "I'm aware, and you're asking me anyway. You walked into the wrong building and talked your way into a job. I thought you might be comfortable with complicated." She almost laughed again. "What's in it for me?" He named a number, a bonus, added to her next pay. She kept her face neutral, which took some effort. "And flexible hours for the next month," he added. "All right," she said, "but I have conditions." "Of course you do. You answer my questions about your family before we walk in. I won't be caught off guard. And if your mother asks how we met, I'm not saying a boardroom. That's too boring. We'll say a coffee shop. Fine. And you at least pretend to be warm. Not dramatic. Just human. Slightly." He gave her a long look. "I can manage slightly." His mother's house was the kind of house that had a name not printed anywhere, but you could feel it. It sat in the hills above West Vancouver with a view of the water and the kind of garden that took full-time attention. Vaughn had told her on the drive over. His mother was Elspeth Harlow, 71, former architect, fiercely sharp, and not remotely interested in being managed. "She'll like you or she won't," he said, pulling into the drive. "There's not a lot of middle ground with her." "What does she do when she doesn't like someone?" She's polite about it. That's actually worse. Elspeth opened the door herself. She was elegant in the way of women who had stopped trying to impress anyone decades ago and had simply become themselves. She looked at Molly for a moment, then at her son, and smiled in a way that had a small amount of smugness in it. "Finally," she said. "Come in." The dinner was warm, well lit, and involved a pasta dish that Molly thought about for days afterward. Elspeth was funny and direct, and she asked questions that didn't feel like questions until they'd already been answered. "So how did you two meet?" she asked, halfway through the main course. "Coffee shop," Molly said. "I was waiting for a latte and he was behind me in line, and very visibly annoyed that it was taking too long." "That sounds like him," Elspeth said. "I told him that impatience doesn't actually make coffee faster. He told me it felt productive." She glanced at Vaughn. "We got to talking." Vaughn, to his credit, looked entirely comfortable with this version of events. He even added, "She was reading a book I'd been meaning to read." It was a reasonable excuse to keep the conversation going. Elspeth looked between them with something that was clearly satisfaction. "He never keeps conversations going." "I've noticed," Molly said. "I do most of the talking. He listens, which is actually rare." Vaughn looked at her briefly. She wasn't sure if that part was in the script or not. She hadn't meant it to land the way it did. On the way home, the car was quiet for a long time. "She liked you," he said finally. "I know. You can tell because she stopped asking careful questions and started just talking. You're observant. It's how I survived in rooms I wasn't supposed to be in." She looked out the window at the streetlights sliding past. "She's going to back off the setup attempts? Probably. For a while." "Good." Molly paused. "She misses you, you know." "Not in a dramatic way. Just, she wishes you weren't quite so far away." He didn't answer immediately. "I know." "Okay," she said, and left it there. The next few weeks settled into something that felt almost natural, which was the part that started to worry her. They had an arrangement. It was professional, structured, and completely sensible. Elspeth had invited them to Sunday brunch twice, which they'd attended. There had been one company event where it was easier to arrive together. They had a shared story, a plausible timeline, a set of small, consistent details. What they hadn't planned for was the Tuesday afternoon when Vaughn's 12:30 meeting ran 90 minutes long, and Molly brought coffee to the boardroom without being asked. And when she left, one of the senior partners said, loud enough to carry, "Where did you find her?" And Vaughn, not missing a beat, said, "She found me." He told her about it that evening when she was packing up. "You didn't have to say that," she said. It was accurate. It was sweet, which is new. He looked at her with that evaluating expression she'd come to know, except there was something else in it now, something that wasn't calculation. "You're good at what you do, Molly. It's not difficult to say." She held his gaze for a moment. "You're better at this than you think you are." "At what?" "Being a person." He almost smiled. "You have low standards. I really don't." There was a pause that lasted a few seconds longer than it should have. "Good night," she said, and picked up her bag. "Good night." She was halfway to the elevator when she heard him say her name. She turned. The Kitsilano note. The zoning clause. "You were right. It saved us about $40,000 in revision costs." "Oh, I should have said it sooner," she nodded. "Thank you for saying it now." Then she got in the elevator and stared at the closing doors and thought, well, this is becoming a problem. The problem arrived fully on a rainy Wednesday when her college friend Patrick showed up at the building. He'd texted that morning, "I'm in Vancouver for a conference. Want to grab lunch?" And she'd said yes without thinking, and now he was in the lobby at noon, easy and warm, a little taller than she remembered, telling a story about his flight that made her laugh on the way out the door. When she came back an hour and a half later, she found Vaughn at her desk, which he never did. "There were 2 things I needed from the Bellamy file," he said. "I left both of them flagged on your desk before I went to lunch." "I know." "I found them." He didn't move. "Who was that?" She paused, recognizing the question. "Patrick Weir. Friend from university. He's here for a conference." "Old friend?" "We dated briefly in second year. Nothing serious." She set her bag down. "Why?" "He's checking on the file. You said you found what you needed." "A beat." "I did." She looked at him steadily. "Vaughn, are you?" "It's fine," he said, and walked back into his office. She stood at her desk for a moment, then took a very long breath. That evening she stayed late finishing a proposal. He stayed late too, which wasn't unusual, But when she stood to leave, he appeared at his office door. "Can I ask you something?" "You can always ask." He leaned against the doorframe. He looked, for the first time since she'd known him, slightly uncertain. "Does this arrangement, the pretending, does it complicate things for you? With other people? With your life?" She considered him carefully. "It's just dinners and a few events. That's not what I asked." She put her jacket on slowly. "I think it complicates things, yes. But not in the way you might mean." She picked up her bag. "It's starting to feel less like pretending and more like..." She stopped. "Like what?" "Like something I'd actually want." The silence in the room was very specific, the kind that follows something true. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Whatever this is, I know." She walked toward the door, then stopped beside him. "But you're better at it than you think you are. I already told you that. You also said you had low standards, and you said you didn't believe that." She met his eyes. "You were right." She went home. He stood in the doorway for a while after she left. He didn't call. He didn't text. For 5 days he was professional and precise, and returned to exactly the version of himself he'd been before, the one that ran on efficiency and didn't leave doors open. Molly matched him for it, because she'd learned from difficult rooms. And she knew how to hold herself together when she needed to. But she also knew what she'd seen in his face, and she didn't unknow things easily. On the 6th day, Elspeth called her directly. She didn't know how Elspeth had gotten her number and didn't ask. "I'm hosting a small gathering Friday evening," Elspeth said. "I'd love you to come, with or without Vaughn, frankly." Molly went. With Vaughn, who had called the morning of, and said, "My mother invited you to something," and she'd said, "I know, she called me," and there had been a pause, and then he'd said, "I'll pick you up at 6. The gathering was 8 people, not small by some standards, but intimate by Elspeth's. There was wine and a very good cheese board, and a conversation that moved from city planning to baking to a documentary. Someone had seen about migratory birds. Molly found herself talking to Elspeth's old colleague about a neighborhood in East Van that was changing, and she got genuinely engaged in it. Forgot to perform anything, just talked. At one point she looked across the room and found Vaughn watching her, not evaluating. Something she hadn't seen before. On the drive back, he was quiet until they were almost at her building. "You were right," he said. She waited. "When you said it was starting to feel real." He kept his eyes on the road. "I've been telling myself the discomfort I've been feeling this week was practical, that it was about the arrangement and what happens when it ends and how it affects work." He paused. "But that's not what it was. What was it?" He pulled up outside her building and put the car in park. Then he turned to look at her directly, which was, she had come to understand, the most serious thing he did. "I don't want this to end," he said. "The actual arrangement, the pretending, I'd be fine if that stopped tomorrow, but I don't want to stop." He looked for the word, "having you around, talking to you, knowing what you think about things." Molly was quiet for a moment. "That was more words than you've ever said at once," she said. "I'm aware, it was uncomfortable. You did well." "Did I?" She unclipped her seatbelt. "I'm not going anywhere, Vaughn. I came to work at this building by accident, and I've stayed on purpose, and I think you know that." She opened the door. "Come up for coffee. It's 10:30. I know what time it is." He looked at her. Then he turned off the engine. They sat in her kitchen for 2 hours, talking about nothing urgent and everything real. She told him about growing up in Winnipeg and the particular texture of prairie winters, and how she'd moved to Vancouver at 22 with $200 and a plan that turned out to be mostly wrong. He told her about his father, who'd built the company and died too young, and about the pressure of inheriting something people expected you to protect rather than change. At one point, she said, "You're allowed to change it, you know. That's not betrayal. That's continuation." He looked at her across the kitchen table. "You say things that I've thought but didn't have the words for. That's useful, isn't it?" "Very," she smiled. He reached across the table and took her hand in a way that was neither dramatic nor calculated. "Just decided." "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. Elspeth had, of course, known things were shifting before either of them admitted it. She mentioned this to Molly several months later over tea, cheerfully and without apology. "You looked at each other like you were both working very hard not to look at each other," she said. "Which is the clearest possible signal. We weren't subtle." "No, but you were honest, which is rarer." Elspeth had also, as it turned out, been the one to call Dana after Vaughn's third assistant had resigned, to suggest he broaden the criteria. She hadn't engineered Molly walking into the wrong building, but she had been ready. "I was waiting for someone who wouldn't be rattled by him," she told Molly. "You were the first one who came back the next day and still seemed like yourself." "I almost didn't come back," Molly admitted. "I know, he told me." Elspeth put down her cup. "He said you were the first person who told him the truth in an interview, and he didn't quite know what to do with it. He hired me anyway. He's smart when he lets himself be." Molly thought about the morning she'd walked into the wrong lobby with a wet umbrella and a coffee-stained resume and a complete lack of the right credentials, and how she'd told the truth instead of a prepared answer, and how that single decision had somehow rearranged her entire life. The proposal came on a Saturday in November, which was deeply characteristic of him. No artificial occasion, no elaborate misdirection. He'd made breakfast, which he did well when he chose to, and they were sitting at the kitchen window watching the rain on the harbor when he slid a small box across the table. She looked at it, then at him. "I had a speech prepared," he said. "It was about probability and unexpected variables. Dana said it was terrible. She was right. So I'm just going to say that you walked into my life by accident, and I intend to make that accident permanent." He opened the box. "If you want to." Molly looked at the ring, which was simple and exactly her taste, which meant he'd been paying attention for a long time. "You told your mother first, didn't you?" she guessed. "Last month. I didn't confirm it. She texted me a heart emoji on Thursday. I thought it was for something else. It was not for something else." She laughed. He reached for her hand. She gave it to him. "Yes," she said. "Obviously, yes." He put the ring on her finger and she held his hand for a moment, both of them looking out at the gray November water, the city quiet and rain-soaked and completely indifferent to the fact that two people had just decided to be permanent. "I need you to know," she said, "that I'm going to keep telling you uncomfortable truths. I'm counting on it. And I'm not going to cry in the stairwell." He looked at her. "I know. That was actually the first thing I liked about you." The wedding was small, which was what both of them wanted. 30 people in a room above a restaurant in Gastown, fairy lights and wood tables, and no one in the room they didn't actually want there. Elspeth sat in the front and looked, for the first time in years, like she wasn't quietly worrying about something. Patrick came and brought a gift that was a framed print of the coffee shop story, the invented version, the one Molly had told at that first dinner, with a small note that said, even the fake version was real enough. Dana gave a speech that was technically about work and completely about them, and made half the room cry without trying. When Molly and Vaughn stood across from each other and said the words, she thought about a woman in Winnipeg who'd packed 2 bags and got on a bus and decided that starting over was just another word for starting. She thought about a lobby with marble floors and a visitor badge she'd been handed by accident. She thought about the particular sound of heels on a 22nd floor and a man who'd looked at her résumé and said, "That's either very lucky or very competent." She'd never decided which one. Both maybe. Both worked fine. What did you think of Molly and Vaughn's story? Let us know in the comments. How would you rate it from 0 to 10? And don't forget to subscribe to Stunning Stories and hit the bell so you never miss what's next. There's another story waiting for you right here, and we think you're going to love it.